You know, we left Reykjavík, we actually passed near a bank that had a good 10 meters depth, and it quickly became 100 and 200 and 250, and while we slept overnight, it went to 350 and boom, 1100. It dropped off quickly, and we've been traveling in waters much deeper today. And when we get into waters of these kinds of depths, that things can feel a little bit more barren. The bird life often drops off, and whale sightings can be few and far between off the shelf waters. So I feel like today a lot of magical things happened out there, and it wasn't for lack of gongoozling. I didn't make this word up either, but this is one of my favorite words, and I hope on this voyage, whether you thought this was going to happen to you or not, I hope you feel like you can gongoozle a lot. And it's simply looking out at a body of water, whether it's lake, river, ocean, taking time intentionally to look out at the sea in this case, or look out at a body of water for the sake of gazing out and taking in that environment. Even if you don't know if something will show up, even if you don't know that there'll be birds or whales or things to see. So I want to challenge you to gongoozle and let me know what you find and let us in on the opportunity. Might be similar to what the first sighting looked like. We heard that our staff captain, Andre, from the bridge made the sighting at a distance and called it out over the radio, and it allowed us to mobilize, to make an announcement on our radio, which also translated into an announcement. I have crossed this Denmark Strait many times, and I've never made a crossing with the sea state so calm and consistently from last night through the morning and still right now. So looking out there, this kind of sea state also, to me, just rings opportunity. As in, when we're out in open water and we have the ability to see this far and with less detail on the surface of the sea, it allows us an opportunity to notice things differently or to see birds in different behavior. And I feel like we were rewarded with that today.
As I mentioned before, the currents have a strong impact not only on the food in the ocean but also on life on land, because they affect the climate, the local weather. We find more birds when it's warmer, of course. Most of the Arctic specialists are all along the Arctic basin, from Greenland to northern Russia, also to Alaska and Greenland. There's very few cases of birds with a restricted distribution. And the Arctic is home to 6 times more species than the Antarctic, but the biomass is much higher, right, in the Antarctic. So we have more diversity in the Arctic, but more weight in Antarctica because the penguins are heavy birds. And lastly, there's only very few Arctic residents. Most of the species leave the place, and when they do so, they go to the distance. They travel very far. Some of them go to Patagonia. And remember, the Arctic term connects those two for our region.
Tonight we'll focus on, well, the ice in general, the other type of ice, the glacial ice, the exploration of this region. It's been an area of exploration for us coming here for the first time on this voyage, but also an area of exploration for Nansen and for his fellow scientists, particularly his fellow glaciologists, who were interested in finding out more about the ice in the late 1800s. And so one of the supporters of Nansen's expedition was a glaciologist called Helen. And he'd spent a lot of time working in Scandinavia, working in Europe, he was very familiar with a different type of glaciological landscape. He was used to looking at this sort of thing. But he'd also done a trip himself to Greenland, and he'd found in his observations that the ice, that some of the glaciers in Greenland were moving, flowing downhill at a speed of 20 metres or more a day. And that was pretty unheard of, that was very unexpected. A lot of the glaciological scientific establishment didn't want to accept that, but Helen was adamant. And he wanted Nansen's expedition to be successful because he wanted to get more information about what was going on with ice. Because he looked at this landscape in Norway, in Europe, and he recognised features that would most likely have arisen from glacier activity. These big U-shaped valleys, the pile of till or debris which was on the valley floor or forming moraines. Things like this, scratches on the bedrock. It was long accepted that these scratches formed on the surface of the rock were caused by the ice as it moved over the area, but that movement was thought to be quite small and short-lived. They didn't imagine ice moving very quickly or over such long distances. But Helen was convinced, and so he encouraged the sponsorship of Nansen's expedition, and he set off. At the time, valleys like this were interpreted as areas where there's been earthquake activity, faults, so faults causing the land in between to sink slightly, and that would create the valley. They couldn't imagine that a valley like this could be carved by a glacier. But because Helen had seen these dynamic, fast-flowing glaciers in Greenland, he was convinced that these valleys were actually carved by the glaciers themselves. And so when you look at what's going on in a glacier, when you take a slice through the ice, you see where the ice is in contact with the bedrock, it rips up little fragments of rock and incorporates them in the base of the ice. And so your glacier and the rocks within it act a little bit like sandpaper, and you use sandpaper for smoothing off your furniture, your wooden furniture, making it different shape. The same thing happens with your glacier. The ice is like the paper of the sandpaper, and the rocks ripped out of the landscape around it are like the garnets, and it's the garnets or it's the rock which do the carving or which do the polishing of the landscape. And over time, these dynamic glaciers flowing downhill carve some of the most impressive landscapes you'll see anywhere on Earth. And we saw a bit of that today on the Zodiac cruise. You might have seen features a little bit like this. So very smooth, almost rounded off looking areas of rock where the ice has passed over the surface, and the rocks held within the ice, that sandpaper has smoothed and rounded off the landscape. And also see features like this. These are the lines, the gouges formed in the bedrock from the rocks embedded in the base of the ice, passing over the surface and gouging out these lines. So this is a fairly recently deglaciated landscape, and it's an area where there's been erosion, where the ice has been ripping out the rock and carrying it away. We'll go to other parts of Greenland where we see the deposition part of glaciology, where all the till and all the moraine is left behind. But here has been an area of erosion where the land has been reduced.
The area that the ship passed through today, we came in quite cautiously through Reykjavík. There were a few soundings, as you remember from yesterday's chart. There was a few numbers, but not very many. So we were moving very, very cautiously. Just in the last few years, expedition vessels, one in particular, has run aground in East Greenland for straying just 10 meters off previously scanned route. So we were being very cautious as we followed the few soundings that existed out in the bay, and then from here onwards we were really forging a completely fresh path. This is as the WASP started to send bathymetry back to the bridge. That's the IT officer's finger there. This was the forward-facing sonar, again as the red, which is bad, you know, comes up towards the 300. So tomorrow, 9 a.m, we'll be down here in Skildungen, and still we're looking at blues, turning a little green, starting to get a little orange offshore, but still good. And when we're in the shelter of the fjord,
when you go for bird watching, you are relaxed. You are not stressed anymore, and you don't release much more cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And it has been proven that it keeps low your anxiety and your level of stress. So if you are anxious, just keep calm and go look for birds, because you're going to be relaxed nearly instantly. Yes, also the sound of bird. Do you like the sound of bird? I do. You know, in spring early morning. Listen to that. Don't you feel relaxed? I do. This is like relaxing. You can't find more relaxing like sound than bird song. So that's another good reason to listen for birds and to look for them. And last but not least, birds are clearly a permanent source of joy. When you go bird watching, you are always in a good mood.